Do you have any practical questions before I play the tape? I have, for example, announced in the title moment forming and integration. The second word I mention in this very moment for the first time tonight. Integration. But I hope that it has become clear that I have been talking now for almost half an hour about integration. How much a given moment is able or is to integrate of other moments, and to what extent it integrates parts of moments that have been heard before and that are going to be heard afterwards. It's all a process of very conscious integration of. I'm dealing with degrees of integration. How much and from which moment in any given musical event I'm integrating. You will hear later on how this works, for example, on the level of language, or the use of material that can be sung, spoken, whispered, etc. What kind of language material and how language material can be integrated. And to what extent? Let's say you have a moment which is in a certain language, and how much it can integrate as an insert from another language. Just to give you an idea.
Would you indicate which moment you may be at during the tape?
Would you like to? Would that be of help? I mean, we are now very much in the visual. You see, if I can do this naturally, it's very, very easy, but then I just point on the block. Would it not be more adventurous to try to find out if you feel when the moment changes, and to what extent it changes, and to get confused? I mean, I can do that, but that's well. Who wants me to point at the blackboard when a new moment is coming? You see, I had in mind to even switch off the lights and let you hear, experience the music.
You can do that at home.
Oh, you have the record?
Yes.
We can close our eyes if we don't want to.
Oh, that's a good idea, yes. It needs an effort, doesn't it? I mean, even a physical effort. Yes, if you want. He says we can close our eyes if we don't want to see these things there, these symbols. Yes.
Did you have the material before you planned this gig, or did the material, the actual material, come after you planned?
During. There was certain feedback, you see. I had certain material in mind. I thought I restrict myself to the extreme. I was thinking of the minimum of reformers, choir, and that was clear to me. I wanted to integrate language and all aspects of language, voices, and so naturally solo voice and groups of voices. Then instruments, yes, but then with the organization of the musical moments, for example, I had oboes in mind, and I forgot about them during the work more and more. I wanted to combine with trumpets, oboes, and also other instruments, but the more I dived into this structuring, this moment forming, the less material I needed, because the more it became interesting for me to calculate very carefully how much the moments would have in common and how little they would have in common. The choice of material then was firmly related to the structuring of the musical entities, yes.
I do think it would be more interesting if you followed your own idea and you switched out the lights and left the total music.
Yeah, there's a gentleman who says it would be more interesting if I would, if I would switch off the lights and you would try to experience Because this is so simple now. I treat you now like in a kindergarten, you see. I say, here. If I do this, then you say, aha, yes, naturally. It's the aha effect, as we say.
How do you express the pitch of your music in notation? And is there any connection between orthodox notation and the way you write your music?
Give me an answer yourself after what I have said. What would you imagine an extreme verticalism, homophony, and periodicity? What kind of notation would you use here? An extremely determinate one, which means the classical notation we will find mostly here. In the statistic one, we will find graphic notation. Everything that is primarily M, statistic, randomness, has fields inside of which certain elements can be distributed freely. There the pitch notation is less determinate, more indeterminate. To a great degree, sometimes they're just lines. Or for the choir, I just say this is the highest, this is the lowest. I assist them without note lines, and I make boy, ba, 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 do, etc. So then it's relative. And the same applies to time, where I write a time box, and here is the cue of a conductor, here's the cue of a conductor, and I just write 7. And during this time, you have the possibility of 7 strokes on drums, on any drums, for a drum player. And whenever, I give, for example, 7 syllables, and I write them on top of each other. Perhaps there is some more space. For example, I write O, or poo, or boy, boy. Phonetic writing, everything that is nonsense, that consists of nonsense syllables or onomatopoetic syllables, is written in phonetic writing. Boy, or etc. Boy, or poo, or oh, etc. And then I say to every male singer of a group gets, let's say, 5 or 6 during a certain time, which may be 2 minutes. And then the solo soprano is singing something, and you just say, comment the solo soprano with these syllables whenever you like. So there's an extreme randomness of the distribution in time, and even of the order. They can use it in any order. When they listen to the solo soprano, even watch the solo soprano, whatever she sings, then they say, po, or they say, poi, or they say, ho la la. You see, it applies. It is right to do this, etc.
Yes, but you can be very precise on your notation for pitch. You can be very precise on your notation for time, but you cannot be precise for dynamics. And if you're using such things as forte or mezzo forte, it's a very imprecise notation.
How would you
get
change
over
that? How would you change that?
This is I'm asking you if you need to quote it precisely. The rest of your notation is precise, but when your dynamics come in, they're imprecise because of the existing notation.
Well, how would you change this?
I don't know. I'm asking whether you have found any notation which will allow you to do this.
Well, not for male singing. For choir singers up to the moment. Not for individual notes, no. I can compose scales of dynamics by determining the number of musicians that are playing the same note at the same time. So I work secretly with large scales of dynamics where the individual musician doesn't know that he is contributing to a definite degree of dynamics. But when I have just one line, then all I can use are the 6 or 7 Latin letters, M, F, M, P, or P, or F, and double F and double P in order to indicate levels. This is a historical fact. I have mentioned this several times. We have a natural hierarchy in music. Music is as young as everything is on this globe, just 1,000 years. We know a little about notating sounds and their characteristics. So in the pitches, they started with the pitches. So the pitches are the most precisely notated nowadays. Then much later, 200-300 years, they started to notate durations more precisely. Again, 200-300 years, they started to notate the different dynamics, because before they had just terraces, softer or loud, that was all. The so-called terrace dynamics, and they were not in function. Were just overall determinations. And then again, 200-300 years, they began to differentiate the timbres. And in the middle of this century, I started to notate the direction and the speed of sound in a space, from where it comes, and I'm trying to find new ways of notating movements in a given space for sounds. And there's complete new notation. I'm more than concerned with how people who fly with airplanes describe certain points in space, or who are on the ocean on ships, how they describe in a 360-degree environment, and if it is a half sphere, how you can describe a sound that goes in this movement. Well, you have to find a notation, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. So, for the dynamics, naturally too, if I have found notations, quite a few very efficient ones, but it's very difficult to write them for musicians who are not trained to do more than 6 or 7 degrees of dynamics consciously. I don't know. But that is already something, isn't it? Yeah, something else?
Yes. Weren't the statistics and the graphical processes in your first section tend to invalidate the degree of integration which you've carefully worked out between the moments?
Yeah. What? What's the question?
Your statistic and graphical methods in this first section here, won't they tend to invalidate the very careful degrees of integration which you've worked out between your layers of moments?
There is some misunderstanding when I speak about statistic. It simply says that a certain number of elements is distributed freely within a given space and time unit. And such a box inside of which the notes are floating, you can put into another environment, naturally. It's like putting an aquarium where the fishes are moving somewhere else in another environment where there's nothing is invalidated. You just put something from this moment into this one. So it must be so characteristic that I recognize it within this one. So they must be very different from the beginning, in order to make it possible that this one is remembered in this one clearly as something else that I have experienced before. Yes?
My wife was very philosophical and very much interested in things of mystery. It's curious to know where you think sound comes from.
Where
Where you think sound comes from.
Sound comes from the atoms. Shaking, trembling. Is that an answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Pardon?
Wonderful one.
So then, shall we start then listening? Yes.
We have the records. We don't have the speakers to listen to them with.
Say it again.
Well, we don't have the speakers at home, even if we might have the record.
That's a very good remark, because first of all, listening collectively in a larger group is a quality which can never be replaced by listening alone or in a very small group, because then waves are building up, which are only possible in large groups. If the group is too large, then there are too many distorting interferences. But under certain conditions, a group experience creates its own music, which means its own network of vibrations. And the sound waves are just stimulating these vibrations that all of a sudden begin to vibrate in the individuals and meet each other. So this is very true. And then the power, the volume of air in such a room is very important. The more volume of air, the freer the sounds are. See, that's every sound needs its air, like we too. Every sound is an individual. And speakers are the most, as you know, the most old-fashioned device to reproduce a multiplicity of sounds through one cardboard piece, which is in one loudspeaker. We have 4, which is already some advantage. In order to reproduce, let's say, 80 people or 80 sound sources, we would need 80 speakers at least. And even then, the body of the speaker cannot provide the vibrations that a living body emits when it is singing or blowing. So that's always an enormous reduction. But I think such a volume is wonderful compared to the volume of a living room with a lot of furniture, etc. That it's very difficult to listen in a living room. That's why I always recommend earphones. Then everything is inside. And the physical is almost non-existence, the air. It's another experience, it's very important. What?
Sorry, the music wouldn't be affected if we did keep the lights on.
Very distracting. You want to listen to the music. Our response to the music would be affected if the light goes.
We make an experiment. We do it now, as I thought it would be nice, and then we have a second tape, and then you will decide again. We'll switch them off.